Okay, we are doing this again. Sorry for those who had to wait. I was having some technical issues. I'm joined here today by Chris May. We're going to be debating the thesis, The Christian Scriptures Reveal the Ultimate Standard of Ethics. Before we get into it, Chris, if you just want to briefly tell us a little bit about yourself and what got you interested in this topic.
Yeah, sure. My name's Chris May. I'm from Virginia, and been kind of interested for a while in studying ancient religions, origins, history, and then particularly Christian, or early Christian literature, particularly New Testament, Gospels, and related literature, historical documents, things like that, and then also other mostly ancient religions, philosophy related subjects. So, yep, I'm just interested, enjoy having conversations, and I appreciate you having me on to do so.
Very good. Yeah. When you reached out to me, uh, you were very respectful and you were polite and you challenged some of the things that I said, and I really appreciate that. Um, because a lot of guys they they'll comment saying something like you're an idiot, you don't know what you're talking about, you're so stupid, also I want to debate you, and it's like, well, hold on a second, like
Right.
that's not how we do things. So I appreciate
Yeah, good ways to get people to want to talk to you, right?
yeah, it's not, yeah, not a good way at all. So everything's looking good, so I'll go ahead and start this. uh, The Christian scriptures reveal the ultimate standard of ethics, is what I will be defending. And the way that I'm going to be defending it is not necessarily by putting up Christianity versus categorical imperatives, or Christianity versus egoism, or Christianity versus utilitarianism. My perspective and my belief is that Christianity is the ultimate, and in fact, the only standard of ethics, because we are made in the image of God. And therefore, because we're made in the image of God, we are to find the standard for how we ought to act in God and in God alone. And we find what he says through the Christian scriptures. Uh, there are many other forms of ethics apart from Christianity. However, those forms ultimately have their foundation in man himself. If man is the final point of predication for what is right and wrong, then we have absolute anarchy. So, my argument for Christianity is presuppositional in nature, that there is no other possibility other than the Christian God exists.
All right. Um, you want to just kind of do a question back and forth? Would you like me just to comment on that, or do you want to
Yeah,
ask me a follow-up question?
no, go ahead and comment on that. Tell me your thoughts. Tell me if you agree
Okay.
or disagree, and we'll take it from there.
So I guess the first question I'd ask you, do you feel or do you believe that Christian ethics are rooted in the nature of God?
I would say yes.
Stem from the nature of God.
Yes, I would say that Christian ethics stem from the nature of God. Yeah, I would agree with that.
Okay. So all of God's nature produces what we term Christian ethics.
All of
Pretty
God's,
much, in other words, let me frame it like this. All of Christian ethics are informed by everything that God does or says or commands or just is by nature.
no. No, there
So
are
can you define and where the ethics, like what part of God's nature do Christian ethics come from, maybe?
his prescriptive will for mankind. We don't get Christian ethics from the entire ontology of God because there are certain things that God does in his interactions with humans that are not prescriptive to the whole of ethics. So, for example, when God tells the Israelites to wipe out the Canaanites, that is not prescriptive for the whole of mankind to go out and find some Canaanites and wipe them out. That was only for a specific situation. The whole of ethics would be from his prescriptive will for mankind in regards to ethics alone.
Okay, so if I'm hearing you right, you're defining it more as like a divine command theory.
Yeah.
What God commands is of his nature,
What God commands,
but not everything that God does.
well, I would say what God commands prescriptively to the whole of mankind revealed through the moral and judicial laws of the Old and New Testaments. Yeah. Again, I would just differentiate, say that there were specific things that God said that were not prescriptive for the whole of mankind.
Okay, so there are conditional commands or ethics that are not prescriptive as just as a like an objective command to everybody. Is that how you would define it?
Yeah, kind of. I would say that the same God who said, do not murder, is the God who also told the Israelites, go wipe out the Canaanites.
Okay, so do you think that's a oh, how do you define murder first?
The unjustified taking of another human life.
Okay. So you wouldn't define then killing the Canaanites as murder, right?
I would say that the Canaanites were not innocent bystanders and they were not victims and they engaged in gross immorality. And the natural revelation that they received through creation condemned them to death. And God just so happened to use the Israelites as their form of judgment.
Then it wouldn't be considered murder because God commanded it.
It wouldn't be murder in the sense of the unjustified taking of another human life. If God
Well,
commands,
the Israelite. I'm sorry, go ahead.
no, I was just going to say, if God commands in a certain situation that justice be rendered, think of Isaiah chapter 10, right? The Assyrians, he's commanding the Assyrians to come down and take the Israelites into captivity. And then God turns right around and says he's going to judge the Assyrians for what they did, right? So I would say that God can use people to render justice to another group of people. And I think that that's what we see in the situation of the Canaanites and Israelites.
So if the Israelites killed the Canaanites without God's command, that would be murder. You said that would be fair.
Yes, I would say that that would be murder. Yeah.
All right. So that the hinge that it turns on is God's command. So by God commanding it, it becomes not only a righteous act, it's a required act, right?
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. I would say that. Yeah.
It was like in like when Samuel, right, the prophet man Saul, right, to wipe out the entire group, he actually is reprimanded for not doing that.
Yeah. Yeah. I remember
An
that.
option. It was right. It was a divine command.
Yeah.
Okay. I just wanted to make sure. I'm just trying to get to where. So whatever God commands then is ethical or part of the Christian ethics in and of itself, but they're not necessarily prescriptive In other words, you and I, if we're Christians, we don't have the right to kill because we think God would have commanded, right?
No. I would ground the I would ground all of that in the scriptures, and there's not ongoing
Okay.
revelation right now. So if someone came down and said, "Hey, God told me to kill my neighbor," we would say, actually, Hebrews chapter 1 said that he didn't tell you to kill your neighbor because revelation has stopped. So yeah, I would say that in the Old Testament we have the history of specific situations where God did command justice against a certain group of people, but prescriptively to the whole of mankind, he has willed that we do not murder one another.
Okay. So what would be some commands from the Christian God that you would say are universal or prescriptive to everybody?
Yeah, definitely. I would say that the whole of the moral law would be prescriptive to all of mankind. And then, as a theonomist, I would also say that the general equity of the judicial laws still apply today. So you're familiar with one of the laws that says you have to build a roof around the parapet of your house. That was for the purpose of the preservation of human life. There's another law that says that if you have an ox and this ox is known for getting out and goring people, then you're to be held responsible. The theonomist would say that the general equity therein is that if you know something or an animal or whatever could cause bodily harm and you neglectfully let it happen, for example, if I know the brakes are bad on my car and I don't care and I keep driving it and then I run someone over and kill them, I'm to be held responsible on the basis of the judicial laws of the Old Testament.
So laws that endanger the welfare of others, you would say, are universal and prescriptive.
I would say yes, and I would caveat it by saying that that only makes sense in the system of Christianity where humans are made in the imago Dei. Outside of that, it wouldn't make sense.
Okay. So those laws that the Israelites receive from revelation, written revelation, or some means direct revelation, those are the laws that, or those are parts that they have no option in following.
Well, they
Well,
definitely have an option.
right, but they don't have an option in the sense of they're violating God's commands if they don't.
Yeah, they don't have an option in the sense that it's prescriptive.
Right, and it's because humans are made in the image of God, right? Going back to Genesis.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. So in the New Testament, I guess it would be helpful. What of Jesus's commands, like the Sermon on the Mount commands? Do you believe all of those are prescriptive?
Uh, yeah, I would say so. The Sermon on the Mount, he's reinforcing the Old Testament laws. A lot of people read Matthew 5 and they say, "Oh, he's abrogating the Old Testament." Like the verse that says, "I didn't come to abrogate the law, but to fulfill it." And then the next two
Right.
verses, he reinforces the Old Testament laws. So I would say that I wouldn't make a differentiation there. I wouldn't say that there are Old Testament moral laws and New Testament moral laws. I think that the apostles and Jesus reinforced and reiterated the moral and judicial laws of the Old Testament.
So would you say that Jesus reiterated then naturally Leviticus 24:17? Familiar with?
I can
I can
sure
read
pull.
it to you. It might be.
Yeah, go ahead and read it to me while I pull it up.
So whoever takes a human life shall surely be put to death. Whoever takes an animal life shall make it good, life for life. If anyone injures his neighbor as he has done, it shall be done to him. fracture for fracture, eye for eye, tooth for tooth. Whatever injury he has given a person shall be given to him. Whoever kills an animal shall make it good, and whoever kills a person shall be put to death. You shall have the same rule for the sojourner and for the native, for I am the Lord your God. So they're not something that Jesus would follow, right?
Yes.
It's prescriptive.
Yes.
Okay. So my question will be, how do you square that when Jesus said, you have heard eye for an eye, but I tell you, not resist the evildoer?
Yeah, I would square it by saying that the Judaizers, the Pharisees, abused and perverted the Old Testament laws. I think that you can't read Matthew 5 and come away saying that he's not reaffirming the Old Testament laws. Let me pull it up real quick. Matthew 5:17. You know this very well. You've talked about this in a lot of your debates. Don't think that I've come to abolish the law of the prophets. I did not come to abolish, but to fulfill. People read that and they say, "See right there, it's fulfilled. The Old Testament law is fulfilled." But the next two verses, "Truly I tell you, until heaven and earth pass away, not the smallest letter or one stroke of a letter will pass away until all things are accomplished. Therefore, whoever breaks one of the least of these commandments and teaches others to do the same will be called least in the kingdom of heaven." So I think that if we try to say that Jesus is saying, on one hand, hey, you heard it said eye for an eye and tooth for a tooth, those don't apply anymore. Instead, now what you have to do is not resist the evil one. I don't think that's what he's saying. I think that what he's saying is that people took grace out of the equation completely, right? If somebody broke my tooth, I would, under the Levitical law, have the right to have their tooth taken away. And I know that there are other interpretations, you know as well, about it's not a literal tooth for tooth, but it could be, like a monetary replacement type of thing. But I think that what the Judaizers,
that's more of a rabbinical
interpretation,
right? Or
yeah, but you also know that in Jesus, one of Jesus's main struggles was the perversion of the law by the Pharisees and Sadducees. So I don't think he's abrogating any of those laws. I think he's trying to get to the heart of the matter.
So would you say then that Jesus permits then an eye for an eye?
I think that he would permit the eye for an eye, but I also think that there's an element of grace throughout the New Testament where you have the right to do something, but just because you have the right to do it doesn't mean that it's the best thing to always act on it.
So if I said, which is the objectively true statement under Christian ethics? A Christian follower has the right to take an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, or a Christian follower does not have the right to take an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth?
False dichotomy.
Is there opposed statements? If both are true, then
you're right. As someone,
how do we make sense of Jesus's statement?
Right. As someone who is well versed in the Old Testament, not Levitical, but judicial laws, if someone was found or not found guilty, but if someone killed another person, who was responsible for putting that man on trial?
The fellow Israelites.
The city leaders. And in the New Testament, right. Romans 13, it's the magistrate who wields the sword to render justice, right? So it could be true that if a man kills your kid, you don't necessarily have the right to retaliate, but you do have the right to call the police and then get justice done against this guy. That's the whole two kingdom theology, right? But there's the church, and the church is not to interfere with government functions, and likewise, government is not supposed to be interfering with church functions. However, both of these spheres serve the same God. So I don't think it's an either or. I think if someone killed my kid,
so can someone in the government, a Christian, uphold the sword? Like, let's go back to the first century. Would a Christian under Jesus's ethics be able to wield the sword as punishment?
Would a Christian in the first century?
Right. Can a Christian take an eye for an eye just because he identifies under? Well, first of all, that would have been an unrealistic
Yeah,
situation.
it's a tough analogy to interact with. But I get what you're saying.
No Christian and Roman, you know.
Yeah, I get the question.
Government official that would identify as a Christian, at least openly.
Yeah, for sure. No, I think that in the Mosaic Law, all throughout, we see that it is the responsibility of the city leaders to render justice, right? It's never up to the individual. In fact, there's a law that if you kill someone, and the avenger of blood is out to get you, you can flee to another city and plead to the city officials there. So I get I get the question that you're asking, and I would say, could a Christian wield the sword? I would say yes, if that Christian is in government, is in a healthy government with city officials, you know what I mean? But if there's a plurality of Christians in government.
You're breaking up badly.
Yeah, I was just saying, can you hear me now? Okay. No, I was just saying that if there was a plurality of Christians in government who could apply the the Mosaic laws in a just fashion, I would say that would be beautiful.
So do you think that would you say it is a universal, let me see how to word this. You would say that it is objectively true that Christians can serve in the government and wield the sword, so to speak.
Wield the sword,
in retaliation or in like a capital punishment type sense, or as a form of justice, like Romans, like Paul talks about in Romans that you're alluding to.
Yeah, I would say
it turns on that. If we're going to say, if Jesus's ethic is the same as, if they're both universal ethics that can be applied objectively, and I think what you're saying has to apply and be true, right?
Right. I'm just saying,
to be someone who can carry that out, unless you're going to say, I'm depending on non-Christians who forever carry out the justice portion, right?
Yeah, well, I definitely think that justice is perverted in America, and it has been for a very long time. I don't think that we have truly a Christian government as of right now. But
let's just just for sake of, to stick to the first century context, because I think it's easier to, in Jesus's context, the only one then that could, by what you're saying, that could issue justice would be a member of the Roman Empire, right? An official is authorized to do so.
Yes.
It would have to be.
Yeah, because everything needs to be. Yeah, I was just going to say, because everything has to be established on the basis of 2 or 3 witnesses. If my neighbor killed my kid, I can't just go over there and get revenge on him. I would have to bring evidence, bring witnesses. There'd have to be a trial. That was the whole. That was very important for the Mosaic Code. Trials, witnesses, just punishments. So I couldn't. It wouldn't be a Christian in the first century saying, "Ah, something bad happened. I'm going to go, get vengeance." It was always
Right,
the
but let's
duty of
say
the
they were
government.
employed. Let's say they were employed through the Roman government. Let's say this is a little bit after Jesus, when it would be possible for a Christian to be part. Let's say this is second century, right? Third century.
Well, even then, Christians are getting brutally murdered. But yeah, sorry, go ahead.
No, so I guess my question would be, let me bring it one step further. How would you respond to Christians who would say no Christian is allowed in any way to take up arms or to use the sword, even in self-defense or in any form of capital punishment?
I would disagree with them. I think that Paul's pretty clear in Romans 13.
He says the governing authorities, which are the Romans, right? But they weren't Christians.
Yeah, this is a prescriptive text.
Absolutely. Yeah, but the governing authorities aren't Christian. They're the ones that are appointed by God, right?
Right.
You think
But what I'm
is
but
Paul appealing to Christians that are part of the Roman government?
No, what I'm saying is that this is a prescriptive text from Paul. He's saying, let everyone submit to the governing authorities, since there is no authority except from God. So is the Roman government from God? Are they servants of God? Do they wield the sword for God? No, absolutely not. Not even close. So what Paul is saying here is that the government has its own distinct authority, but that authority is not outside of God's sovereign decree. He decreed that government should serve him because all creatures are subject to his rule and reign. Just because you join the government doesn't mean that you're not a creature of God anymore.
Right, but God uses a the term Christian would be not really applicable when Paul's, but he uses a non-God fearing government to enact justice, right?
No,
He's using them as an instrument.
no. Well, you talking
So
about
you're
in
saying
Romans
the
in
Roman
Romans 13?
government was enacting God's will?
Mm, I'm not.
Were the Romans enacting the Christian God's will, or were they just instruments used by God?
Neither. They were they were neither instruments, and they were not enacting God's will. They were in rebellion against God's will. What Paul is saying is that the government is the servant of God. When we look at the Roman government, we say they are not the servant of God. Therefore, the problem is with the government, not with Paul. The government has to
So then a
serve God.
Christian So then a Christian in the Roman government would have been acting against God's will, right?
I don't follow.
So then it wouldn't have been lawful for a Christian to be aligned with the Roman government. Is that
Um, yeah, that's a good question.
what the point I'm trying to get at is, if many, and I'll go on to argue that most, in fact, the overwhelming majority of early Christians taught an ethic that they were not able to use the sword or kill in any way. It was unlawful. And I can read you numerous quotes from early Christians who were overwhelmingly in that camp, that they weren't even allowed to serve in the military and weren't able to take communion for those kind of things. So if you're saying that it is a universal ethic that Christian could carry out that, then I would say you're in disagreement with a large majority of Christians in the early church.
Yeah, well, let me respond to that real quick. I don't necessarily care what the early church fathers said, because as a Calvinist Protestant, I care what the scriptures say. So I can read Augustine and follow along and be like, "Yep, that's great. Yep, that's great. Oh, that why did he say that?" Or I can read Tertullian, Origen, Polycarp. I can read all these guys, and they're still subject to the scripture. So at the end of the day, some of the stuff they say is really cool and really great. Other stuff they say really sucks. I'm not a Calvin, or I'm not a Catholic, so they're not really authoritative for me. The second thing I want to say real quick is, again, we have to remember the categories of prescriptive and descriptive. If a self-professed Christian came to our church and said, "Hey, I'm a Christian. I love Jesus. I love God, and I'm serving with Joe Biden's administration to push for more abortion in America," we would say, "Hold on a second, that's inconsistent. You can't serve in the Joe Biden administration for the purpose of getting more abortions and say that you're a Christian." So on one hand, you can say, yeah, Christians shouldn't really be with the Roman government. They kind of suck. They're in rebellion against God. And on the other hand, you can still say, Romans 13, that the government is the servant of God. Do they always serve God? No, absolutely not. But prescriptively, they're supposed to. They're supposed to wield the sword to enact God's laws. They're supposed to protect. What does it say here? For rulers are not a terror to good conduct, but to bad. Is that true? Not right now, it's not. So what Paul is saying is not descriptive.
I agree that the government in the first century, by Paul's standard, was supposed to be the one that wielded the sword. I absolutely agree. But the question is, can a Christian part of that? And my question to you is that overwhelmingly the early Christians said, no, we can't be a part of that. But what I'm getting at is, if you're saying this is an objective, I'm trying to even get what is the objective, because you're saying Christian ethics. First of all, I guess you're saying they're objective, right? You can't even get, already we're not even able to determine whether killing someone or not is the standard that Jesus is defending. And I'm glad you brought up that you're Reformed and Calvinist, and I've noticed that many, you're probably familiar with people like Jeff Durbin, and right?
Sure.
They would be in your camp that would overwhelmingly say, absolutely, you can use self-defense. It would be evil to not use self-defense, right?
Yeah, it would.
I would argue that they're in direct contradiction to what the early church and what Jesus, most importantly, taught.
Right. Well, again, I don't believe that Jesus saying, "You have heard it said, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth," but I say is him abrogating the law. Because in Matthew 5, he says that he did not come to abrogate the law. John 10:35, he says the scriptures cannot be broken. So I don't agree that Jesus is trying to set up a dichotomy between his words and the Old Testament, because Jesus is God incarnate. The same God who wrote the Old Testament is the same God who spoke in Matthew chapter 5, is the same God who said, "You heard it said, eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth, but I say this." He's speaking to a culture that perverted those laws and took them to the nth degree and abused them against their neighbor. Because what's the ultimate law? To love your neighbor as yourself and love the Lord your God. When you use scripture to abuse your neighbor, then Jesus is stepping in and saying, "You've heard it said, but I say." That "I say" is also the Old Testament that says that if a thief breaks into your house, you have the right to kill him.
At night. Not during the day.
Yeah. Not during the day. You're supposed to subdue him.
Right. So, go ahead.
Oh no, I was just coughing. Anytime I do debates, I always just end up coughing. It's horrible.
Yeah, you get that tickle in your throat.
Yeah, it's pretty
Um,
miserable.
I yeah, so I guess, but you seem to be hinging on the opening. So let me pose this to you: didn't it very possible that Jesus recognized that old law was a theocracy, which doesn't apply to the first century, where Jews are living under Roman occupation, and so in that sense he could be essentially changing. It's a different situation. Jews didn't have the power to enforce. They could not. In other words, if a Roman citizen came up and attacked another Jew had no way of retaliating under Mosaic law, right? In the same way.
I mean, they could sure try. It wouldn't end well for them.
Wouldn't end well, right?
Yeah.
So so for one, we could look at it like practically that's gone, right? That
Well,
context of the Mosaic law.
no,
Now,
I wouldn't.
Jews under Roman occupation could have said, yes, if someone breaks my tooth, I'm going to break their tooth back in retaliation. But Jesus is addressing that as well, right? He's
Yeah,
actually saying, no, pray for them, love your enemies.
yeah. He is saying that. In the Psalter, it says, "Blessed is the nation whose God is Yahweh." Psalm 119 is all about the love of the law of God, how beautiful it is, how amazing it is. So I don't think that the law, oh, and also in the Pentateuch, it mentions that these laws are given so that the surrounding nations can see how wonderful the nation of Israel is, how beautiful it is, and that they would join in worshiping God. So I don't at all. I definitely agree that the ceremonial laws were for a specific person, people, group, but I don't believe at all that the judicial or moral laws were confined only to Israel. If that were the case, then would it be morally acceptable for Americans in 2024 to murder one another, steal from one another? I would say no. The moral laws apply regardless of time, regardless of space, because all people are made in the imago Dei.
So we can move on, but I'll just summarize. So would you say, is it fair to say we don't know now whether striking your enemy back or loving your enemy and not resisting are Jesus's ethics or what Jesus would approve?
Uh,
Undecided?
no, we're
Right
definitely
now?
we're definitely not undecided. If someone breaks into your house and is threatening you, or if someone even on the street comes up to you and says, "I'm going to now kill your kids and then kill you," you have the right and the duty to defend them. You also have the option, well, not in that example. If you're walking down the street and someone says, "Are you a Christian?" and you say, "Yeah," and they pull a gun on you, it would be morally acceptable for you to say, "Go ahead and kill me. I'm a Christian. I'm not going to back down." It also is morally acceptable for you to pull out your gun if you're carrying and defend yourself. I don't think there's a dichotomy between the two of those. I disagree that you have to do either or. I think it's
Do you
perfectly
think you could follow Jesus's Sermon on the Mount ethic and be the first one to shoot the person that?
in self-defense. Yeah, because Jesus in Matthew 5 reaffirms the Old Testament laws. And the Old Testament laws, you could defend yourself in cases where it was warranted. So I don't agree
Are
at
you
all.
saying based on the first verses that just says, I've come to fulfill the law? Is there any other passages that Jesus mentions that would give you
John 10:35.
any idea that Jesus is saying that self-defense or physical force is justifiable in any way?
Yeah, John 10:35. The scriptures cannot be broken. Jesus appealed to the Old Testament law as the ultimate standard of ethics.
So So then the eye for an eye is then the ultimate standard.
Yeah, the eye for an eye is an ultimate standard. It's also ultimate that
So
you
then one should
should.
turn the other cheek.
Yeah, the cheek thing has been answered in one of your debates before. It was not about self-defense, it was about an insult. If somebody insults you, you don't attack them, you don't retaliate, you just accept it and you turn the other cheek.
But so I gave you the Leviticus is the root of where he's pulling from, and I showed you it's physical force. It's not like an insult at the water cooler.
Yeah, yeah.
So it is actual physical aggression being used, and Jesus's response is pretty radical. Because think about it, Christian ethics would be kind of useless if they weren't radical, right? Or there wouldn't be much. If a pagan would come up and say, "Yeah, Jesus, I pretty much agree with you," I would do that too. And it kind of takes some.
You still there, Chris? Chris, I don't know if you can hear me, but
Especially since, again, he's quoting the context of what he's saying. He's saying, "Do not return." Right? You've heard it say, right? Hate your enemy, right? He's saying, no, not doing that. We're actually doing the opposite to the point where we're actually praying for our enemy.
yeah,
Why is
which
that? Because vengeance is the Lord's, right?
yes, but the Old Testament also says, "Love your neighbor as yourself." When Jesus is
It
reaffirming the
does.
Old Testament,
But
he's
he's
reaffirming
rejecting the
the
promise.
totality of the Old Testament to love your
What
neighbor
would be
as
your
yourself,
answer when
to
he
treat
says
your
fulfilling
neighbor
the scriptures?
kindly.
He's taking it to an extreme, right?
I think that the context of him saying, "You have heard it said this, but I say this." I don't think there's an issue between him reaffirming the Old Testament and him saying that. I think that it's
So
a
you would
both
say that
and.
the early church is incorrect.
I they're incorrect about a lot of stuff.
That's all right. We can move on. So can
Uh,
I ask? Let me read you this part, and then I'll let, if you don't mind, then you can answer, and then I'll let you ask me because I know I've been. It kind of connects a little bit. You mind if I read you First
yeah,
Corinthians 7:29?
yeah.
Okay, so
Let me
in
pull it up so
First
I can follow
Corinthians,
along
this
with you.
sheds some light onto Jesus's ethics. Now, this is Paul, right, in First Corinthians 7:29. It reads, "What I mean, brothers and sisters, is that the time is short. Now on, those who have wives should live as if they have none, those who mourn as if they did not, those who are happy as if they are not, those who buy something as if they is not theirs to keep, those who use the things of the world as if they are engrossed in them, for the world in this present form is passing away." So, do you think that's prescriptive? So when Paul says, "For now on we shall live as if we have no wives," right? Live like we have no wife. Is that prescriptive, or is that
I
just
think
a
it's
suggestion?
I think it's prescriptive to the audience. I think I'm a post-millennialist, so Jerusalem, 70 AD, Roman persecution, all that good stuff. I think that there's a context to him saying this necessarily. Um, I would also say that Paul, we have to be careful taking his words literally because he does say in Colossians, I believe, that the gospel has gone out to the whole world. Has it gone out to the whole world? No, not literally. So I think with this,
The
he's saying that
Roman world, maybe.
perhaps the Roman world, yeah. The time is limited, so from now on, those who have wives should be as though they had none, those who weep as though they did not weep, those who rejoice as though they did not rejoice. I want you to be without concern. The unmarried man is concerned about the things of the Lord. I don't know. It could be about the coming persecution, the Neronian persecution. I am not sure.
So, how are you interpreting that, Paul? Because he says the present age is passing away.
Yeah.
So, I would read that then that Paul is prescribing Christians should focus on the new age, right? Which I would equate with the kingdom that's talked about in the Gospels. And he's saying to live now as if you have no wives, possessions, all your focus into what's coming up, right? So
Possible.
Again, is that just a suggestion? Or is that actually an ethic that's objective and needs to be followed?
Uh, I don't think it's objective in the sense of prescriptive to all Christians at all times. Excuse me. Because this whole passage is about virgins, married people, unmarried people. He says in verse 26, leading up to the passage, because of the present distress, I think that it is good for a man to remain as he is. And then he goes into all of his stuff. So I think maybe if we let 26 come before the rest of it, he's probably talking about the present distress as.
Pangs. Yep.
Yeah, I think that there's a period of the passing of the baton between the old covenant and the new covenant that finds its fulfillment in the destruction of Jerusalem. So it could be that he's talking about the Roman persecution coming up. Because again, I want to go back to what Jesus said. The Old Testament prescribes marriage, prescribes to be fruitful. Proverbs says that blessed is the man whose quiver is full. As a Christian, I have to say that those aren't abrogated. So Paul, if this is prescriptive to all Christians at all points at all times, then those passages now would be abrogated, and I would say no. Also, Paul says that some people are called by God to remain single for the purpose of ministry. He also says that some people can be married, and if you're burning with lust, go ahead and get married. So I don't at all think that this passage is prescriptive to all Christians. But I did want to get to some other stuff. If that answered.
One and then I'll let you
yeah, of course. Yeah,
so
of course.
Saying you think the people in Corinth are told to not act as if they're not married because of the 70 AD Roman destruction of. So he's telling them, the people that live in Corinth, because in Jerusalem that there's going to be a destruction, and or you're saying
no. Yeah, I would say that it could be. I could be wrong. I would need to study that passage more. I do commend you because in almost all of your debates that you've had, you've brought up the passage in Matthew where Jesus is talking about the swords and the fulfilled prophecy. And I'd never heard that before, and so I went and studied it, and I was like, oh, that's actually has a lot of warrants. So I grant that at this time, I don't know. He could be talking about the Roman persecution. He could not. He says other things in regards to marriage and staying single and ministry and all that stuff. So it's a complicated question, and there's no way I could meaningfully answer it right now.
Maybe talking about the return of Jesus, the second coming.
Probably not. Actually, he could be. Because I believe that Jesus did come in judgment in 70 AD. Because he told the Jews, he said that on this generation will come, right, and then the Jews...
All these things will come upon this generation.
Yeah, and then the Jews, the day before Jesus was, or the day of, I don't know, before Jesus' crucifixion, if you remember, they said, his blood be on us and our children. And sure enough, it was upon them and their children. So I think that that was Jesus's coming in judgment. Daniel 7, I think it was him returning to enact vengeance. I don't think it was his second coming in the sense of him coming back down to earth. But I do think that it was
like the invisible partial preterist return.
Yeah, I am a partial preterist, so I would interpret that as him
And he
coming
was
in judgment.
invisible when he returned.
I wouldn't say that he was like had like invisible superpowers and he was walking around. I think Isaiah 10 has to inform our judgment of Jerusalem in 70 AD. I think that Jesus chose to use the Romans to enact his justice against the Jews. Um, but if you're okay with it, sorry I keep coughing. I gotta get like cough drops or something. Um, I did want to ask you something though about ethics, right? And we're going on 50 minutes, so I don't know how much we'll get into it. Do you remember your debate with Anthony Uvino?
You're breaking up a little bit again.
Oh, sorry. I'll give it a second. Here, I'll drink some water. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you good.
Okay. Do you remember your debate with Anthony Uvino? Uvinio? Uh, He was the other precept guy.
Yeah, he's like a reformed, right?
Yeah, he's also reformed.
Yeah, I think
Uh,
so. That was
in
quite a while ago.
Yeah, it was about 3 years ago. Yeah.
Okay.
In that debate, you said, and I quote, this is a direct quote, you said, I can use logic. It is a tool. Whether I know where the toolbox came from, I can open the toolbox and use logic. I can open the toolbox and use mathematical concepts. I can open the toolbox. We are just debating where the toolbox came from. End quote. Do you think that ethics is in that same line of reasoning where all men have the toolbox of ethics and they can pull from it?
So, the way I define, or not define, but I think about ethics are that ethics fall under an objective, right? So, or a goal, more of a goal. So, all ethics are rooted in subjective goal, right? So the goal is open to what we want it to be, or it's sometimes guided by a certain. Sometimes a goal springs from a previous goal, and then it's kind of in line. But the goal is openly subjective. There's no oughts within defining what your goal is, but within that goal are objective measures to achieve that goal. So there are things that can be shown to be more in line or more successful than other things. So kind of going to that quote, yes, I think it's two separate things. Ethics, how you get to determining what is best measure to achieve that goal is through logic and reasoning. Is
Okay.
kind of what you're.
Yeah, no, that was a great answer.
I would connect that. I think his question was more en route to where do I justify using logic and reasoning, if I remember.
It was.
A long time ago, so.
Yeah, it was. I was just wondering if you would also say that ethics are a toolbox, so to speak, within man that he can pull from and use as he sees fit. Would you say that ethics are? Well, it sounds from your answer that you're saying that ethics are.
I don't know ethics. I mean, ethics are developed from the use of logic and reasoning, and
ethics are derived from the laws of logic.
Ethics are somewhat of a social construct.
Okay, so ethics are not transcendent to the human experience?
Ethics are determined by your goal.
Okay, so they're not transcendent.
So they kind of just work in themselves. So, for example, a soldier's goal is different than a peacemaker's goal, right?
Sure, they're goal as in what they're trying to accomplish pragmatically. But
Right.
does the
Overlap between, but
I was going to say,
sometimes a soldier is a peacemaker. Sometimes a peacemaker might look more like a soldier, right? But
sure. Does
within
it
those
matter?
frameworks, well, go ahead.
Does it matter how we accomplish our goals?
In other words, is there an objective ethic that must be included in achieving the goal?
If, for example, my goal was to get straight A's in school, is it right
Right.
for me to accomplish that goal by cheating?
Right to accomplish that goal by
Is it
cheating.
morally right to cheat given the objective?
Cheating would imply cheating. The word cheating in and of itself implies some form of a breaking of rules. It's kind of like saying, is it okay to murder? Murder by definition is not
Right. So so
authorized.
so is there something outside of me as a
You're
student?
kind of poisoning the well by saying it's cheating to begin with.
Well, okay.
Like,
Well, I
yeah,
want to
I
I want
mean,
to interact. I want to interact with what you said. So, if ethics are primarily goal oriented, and I want to accomplish my goal, why ought I not cheat to accomplish the goal?
because cheating by itself is defined as unauthorized or unethical way of.
And what if I don't care?
You can. I mean, you can. Are you saying someone who just openly, purposely cheats in order to. Trying to get what your question is.
I'm trying to say if ethics are
Can you give me
defined,
like a practical example, maybe?
sure. Ethics,
Instead of just using cheating, like what is the actual action? What's the observable action that somebody's doing
okay.
you would define as cheating?
If ethics are goal, well, let me steelman your position. Uh, what is the scope of the goal? How many people get to define the goal before ethics come into play?
You're breaking up again.
All right, I'll give it a second. What about now?
Yeah, you sound better now.
How many people, how many people's goals have to come into play before ethics are involved? For example, I have a goal to get straight A's in school, and everyone else in the school has their own goals. At what point do we say this is the goal that we as a student body want to achieve?
You're talking about individual versus group goals? When does
Yeah,
the individual become subservient or to the group?
yeah, because
That
I'm trying to do an internal critique of this goal oriented ethics.
uh, so an individual can assign a goal and a group can assign a goal, right? So, like, if it's a group, then it's several individuals or a number of individuals to determine what is the outcome that they want to achieve. Then within that, they are determining what is the best course of action of achieving that outcome. So, if the goal for the group is to achieve A's, then it's better to likely study more, right? Study over a certain amount of hours than to not study over that certain amount of hours. Or whatever is determined to be a process that helps you to achieve that goal.
Okay, so it's not individual.
It could be if the goal is, you know, we want at least 80% of the people in that group to achieve an A, then they could think of it in an individual basis. But
Okay.
I mean, I
So
think goals do start as an individual basis to begin with, and then often what happens is, like I think you're bringing up, is that my goal may conflict with your goal, right? Is that what you're
uh
bringing up?
not necessarily.
Okay.
I just want
How do we?
I want to better understand at what point these goals become ethical in nature. If my goal is to get A's and the next student's goal is to get A's, can we employ ethics to achieve that goal? If everyone else in the school wants to get F's, so would it be unethical for me to get an A in that regard?
So your question is, if everybody wanted to get F's, but my goal and somebody else's was to get A's, it'd be unethical?
Yeah, would it then be unethical to accomplish my class and do well?
No. Why would it be unethical? If my goal is to achieve a certain thing, then I need to take steps to achieve that.
Well,
If
but
someone's goal is to get an F, then it would probably be a pretty easy goal to achieve, right?
so ethics are completely subjective to the individual.
They're objective in that they either work better to meeting a goal or they are less effective to meeting.
So
Everything is
they're
degree.
yeah, so they're
It's not an either or a, like, let's say chess, for example, right? Here's a good example of how you can think of it. It's subjective to whether I want to play chess or not, right? If you say, do you want to play a game of chess? I don't have to accept that. I can say no. But if I say yes, and I agree to play chess, there are certain rules or certain things that will lead to my objective, which would be to checkmate you, right? And your goal is to checkmate me. Within that framework, there are certain things that are more beneficial to achieving that goal than other things, right?
I would agree with that. Are those rules conventional in nature?
Are they conventional in nature?
Yeah. Are they human conventions?
Just they're through using logic and reasoning can think out what would be the best, and often we don't always know what the best. That's why we have to
What is the
discuss,
best?
so like any ethic, and this brings in ethical, any ethic or has to be discussed, and it's a trial or error thing. So this happens all the time where we think that we're actually benefiting some cause by doing X, but we realize it's actually in some way detrimental that we didn't realize, right?
Yeah,
Might
sure.
appear that it's short term benefiting, but in the long term it's detrimental. So we have to weigh, is it better to achieve it the short term, not be so concerned with the long term, or we do these things all the time. So
Yeah,
way back
yeah, I know that I know the school of ethics that says that it's about your motive for doing X, Y, and Z. What I'm trying to get
right.
from you, Chris, is by what standard, you knew I was going to ask this because I'm a presuppositionalist, by what standard do you say that a goal ought to be accomplished instead of a goal not getting accomplished? Because it sounds like ethics is objective in relativity, which is just another way of saying it's just relative. So if my objective is to get more food than my neighbor, then it is ethical for me to
Right.
steal from my neighbor, take as much food when he's not looking out of his pantry, and run back across the street. Most people would say that's unethical, but how do you square that with your worldview?
All right. So if I'm playing chess, does the Christian worldview inform me whether it's best to open up by moving my knight first versus my pawn?
I have no idea. I've never played a chess a day in my life.
Okay. But does the Christian worldview inform those kind of things? The
uh,
first step and everything.
the Imago Dei does.
Being in the image of so if you're in the image of God, are you informed about what the best choice is?
Not if you don't know how to play chess.
Well, forget. I'm just using chess as a can move off of chess if that might be more confusing.
I'm super
Bring something
confused.
more like you were talking about. What were you talking about? Food, like
Yeah. If my goal is to get as much food for my kids as possible, or for me as possible, if I'm just by myself, should I, because it's my goal to eat food, steal from my neighbor? Does that become ethical?
I don't know if God, like, so when the Israelites were in Egypt, God told them to take the possessions of the Egyptians, right?
Yep.
So they were commanded to do that.
Yes, they were
That
commanded in that instance, and I'm
is
commanded
that
not to do
rooted in
that.
God's nature to command to take things?
Is it rooted in his nature to command to take
Yeah, is it
things?
God's nature to take others'
No,
belongings?
no. He commands us not to steal.
Okay. Okay. So only unless he asks you to do it, right?
Sure, yeah. Isaiah chapter 10. Nations should not be going to war against other nations unless he's rendering judgment. When he renders judgment, Acts chapter 4. Remember Acts chapter 4? He says uh, that God predestined Pilate, the Jews, the Romans, to do what his hand wanted them to do. They were predestined to do
Right.
that, but they were still held accountable. So that
Right.
example of them leaving, of the Israelites leaving Egypt, they were doing that as a punishment, a judgment against Egypt. So that's not prescriptive to
So
all
they were
Christians.
acting within God's decree, but they were violating his moral law.
No. It was a specific situation for a specific purpose to render judgment against a wicked nation.
That's what you would say when the Israelites.
Yeah, but I want to get back to critiquing your worldview because I still don't
So
understand.
under your worldview, I would have no reason to take the food if it wasn't mine. If you're going by, unless God tells me to do it.
Right, but you're conflating prescriptive and descriptive texts of the Bible. When God tells the Israelites go plunder Egypt, he's not saying Chris and Brandon in America 2024 make sure you guys do it too. There's prescriptive and there's descriptive texts of the scripture. When you
Right, so
conflate
he's
those two,
saying
you get all sorts of confusion.
right, unless I tell you to steal, you're not to steal, right?
Right. But again, I want to get back to your worldview because I let you critique mine for a good chunk of the first. How how ought I to live as a human being? What am I supposed to do?
So you're supposed to apply logic, reasoning. You're
Is
supposed
logic and
to,
reasoning a priori to the human experience, or is it subjective to the human experience?
you have to use logic and reasoning for it to make any sense. And like for we can't. You're presupposing that I can use some form of logic or reasoning, right, to even have a discussion.
Sure, but I'm asking you, are laws of logic transcendent and a priori to the human experience?
So laws of logic are like a form. It kind of could equate to like a language. It's something that this goes back to the question you asked me about the conversation that I had. Was it Anthony?
Anthony, yeah.
It, it, we know the laws of logic are there to use. We use them every day. Where they came from is a separate question. You agree I can use them. I agree I can use them.
No, no. The
question
question,
where
the question of the foundations of the laws of logic is fundamental to our use of those laws of logic. If you assume in a chance universe that everything is random and we don't really know, but we have these laws somehow, some way, we don't really know, then you're assuming that they're conventional in nature. You use the example of language. Language is a human convention. If language and logic are the same thing, then logic is a human convention. And on convention, I say that the scriptures are the ultimate standard of ethical authority for all human beings. And on convention, I'm right. You see the problem with it? I don't mean to come across as rude. I'm just debating, is all.
No, what you're saying is that I'm using a shovel and you're sure where the shovel comes from, that somehow impacts my use of the shovel. Is that what you're saying?
I'm saying that if you say that the laws of logic are conventional, if they were created by humans for a purpose, as is the case in language, then I'm saying that on convention, I, as a human, the final point of predication, say that the scriptures are authoritative, and therefore they are.
I'm not saying I don't know that I'm saying they're invented by humans. Something we have access to, and
so they're transcendent
in some metaphysical nature. Still a separate question of where they come from. Ultimately, doesn't hinder the use of them.
It sure does. If are they 100%, are they transcendent to the human experience?
So is logic different if it was transcendent versus not?
Absolutely.
Still be logic with the laws of non-contradiction, identity, all that still apply?
Absolutely not. If the laws of logic are human conventions, then humans can conventionalize them away and create new laws of logic.
So you would say that if I said my car was both in the state of California and out of the state of California, that it would be not a problem if they were conventional?
I'm saying that, yeah, if laws of logic are conventional, as in the skeptic worldview, if we don't know where they came from, then how can you with certainty say that they are transcendent and it is not true that my car is both in California and in Vermont?
So can I ask you a question? When you're when you have a conversation, let's say you're going to an expert on a particular topic. Let's just say you're going to the bank and you need some help with sorting out some problem with your bank account. Are you first checking whether that the person knows whether logic is conventional or as a metaphysical basis?
Nope. I assume that they're made in the image of God, and the same laws of logic that I operate they operate by.
So it's possible then that they do come from a particular God, and I'm just using them, right?
Yes.
Okay, so then it doesn't stop me from using them.
No, well, presuppositionalists would never say that you. Presuppositionalists would. We would never say that you can't use them. We're saying that right. in the skeptic worldview, if you say we don't know where they came from, you are also saying that we don't know with certainty if they are transcendent. And if they are not transcendent, then you can't say that it is not true that my car is in California and Vermont. It's you see the chain? If you say we don't know,
No,
you're also
you're saying I can use them. If you're saying I can use them, then that statement is coherent and logical. If you're saying I can't use them, you're not. You're saying I can use them, but you're saying somehow that makes what I'm saying. You're saying it makes it illogical to you because you don't know
no,
what I'm rooting it in?
no. I'm saying.
Either I can use them or I can. It's again like the shovel. Whether I know it comes from seventh heaven or whether I think it comes from a manufacturer, it works, right?
Ought I use a shovel?
Question of where it comes from is a separate question. It's a fascinating and interesting question. I'm with you on it's worth exploring, but it's a separate question of whether we can use logic or not. But you seem to be kind of saying I can use it, but I can't justify it. Either you think what I'm saying is logical or you don't. And if you think it's illogical, then we can examine why what I'm saying. I'm not saying this what I'm saying. Any statement I make, you can examine, is it logical or is it not logical? And we can go from there, right? But if you say it's logical and it doesn't matter whether it's transcendent, which could be true, or it could be conventional, as you use the term. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does.
The ontology, where it comes from, is a separate question, which again is worth debating. But then we just get into which God does it come from? Is it even a God? Is it a, where does it come from, right? Maybe there's a lower level angelic being that is in charge of logic, right? And that's,
Yeah,
we don't know. There's to assume it comes from the Trinitarian God of Christianity is a separate question that we can then explore by determining and investigating claims of Christianity and looking into that, right?
sure. We've gone for about an hour and 17, so we'll start to wrap it up. I think that if I think that the impossibility of the contrary proves that the Christian God is the only foundation for ethics. If we take your worldview and say that ethics are derived from goals, that is just another way of saying that ethics are ultimately subjective. So my argument is that there is an impossibility of the contrary. It is impossible that we don't get our ethics from God. The only possibility is that it's from God. Ethics are transcendent to the human experience. There will never be a goal that supersedes what is morally right and wrong. That's been my argument. Any closing statements, Chris?
Yeah, I mean, I would just say we first touched upon we're still undecided what is Jesus's ethics in whether you're allowed to use aggression on self-defense or whether you're not, right? So we're not sure whether that's objective, not sure which parts of scriptures are descriptive versus universal. So we're real confused on what the ethics are. And then I think we finished with what is the root of logic and reasoning. And we talked about, but you agree that anybody can use logic and reasoning. It's just that if we don't know what it's rooted in, then that's why I'm kind of left at confusion. There's a lot of loose ends that.
Yeah, well, it's definitely interesting conversation. I think there's a lot more we both could learn from each other and from all the resources out there. But we've gone for about an hour and 20, so Chris, thank you so much for coming on,
I
having this
appreciate
discussion.
it.
It was very insightful, very fun. I hope you know that I really enjoyed it. I enjoyed having you on. It was a great discussion. So thank you for your time.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Thanks, Chris. Take care.